Greetings from the third dimension. You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, the biggest UK paranormal network. I'm David Young, and this is Paranormal Dimensions. Well, here we are on another Paranormal Dimensions show. I've got a fantastic guest again for you today. It's Michael Feeley. Now, Michael's been he's been doing lots of work on the pyramids or ancient architecture and the secrets of ancient codes and everything. Honestly, it's going to be fascinating. This has always fascinated me. I think how it started out, he's an ex-police officer and his wife, Sarah. They experienced a spiritual awakening of a lifetime in 2009 when they relived a murder of a Victorian teenager. Whether we'll actually get into this, I don't know, but I will actually be having some links on my site, on the Paranormal Dimensions site, if anyone will be interested in that. But I'll let Michael lead on to that if he'd like to tell us something about that. But anyway, I'm going to introduce Michael now, and we'll go from there, and this is going to be fascinating. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. Thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
It's fantastic to have you on, and thank you for agreeing to come on. I think it's going to be, as I said, fascinating. It's always fascinated me, the ancient pyramids and the Stonehenge and everything. I think you just did a trip to Stonehenge at the weekend, didn't you?
Absolutely. It was just yesterday. What a fantastic day, and people took pictures of UFOs, and really? it was a special day. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing. I know, I saw some pictures and it was a lovely sunny day. I know, it looked cold though.
It was because it's the Salisbury Plains. There's no sort of building line to stop the wind. So the wind was, it was sunny, but it was freezing cold.
Yeah, it did look a bit cold. I saw people sort of all hunched up in their big coats and their gloves and everything.
Anyway, including me, and I don't feel the cold ordinarily.
No, I know what you mean. You do get used to it, don't you? After when you do so much of it, I know. Well, I don't know if you want to tell us anything about how you started out with what I was just mentioning about in 2009, your experience with the Victorian teenager.
Yeah, well, that's really for me where the major start really happened. And as you said quite rightly at the start, I was a police officer in two of the UK's biggest cities, frontline officer, where I dealt with all levels of crime. Being the first on scene to a hostage situation, being the first on scene to a murder, or it could be something mundane like the first on scene to a shoplifting. But I sort of dealt with the complete wide spectrum of everything over 17 years. But I also dealt with a lot of investigations and investigative works, and I do have a very sort of investigative, intuitive mind. And when you've worked in law enforcement and evidential gathering for 17 years, you then you seem to have an eye to be able to piece evidence together and make connections that maybe some people can't. But certainly towards the last 12 or 15 months towards my career, I was becoming very, very disillusioned with what was happening. And around that time, there was lots and lots of what you would deem paranormal things happening to me as well. It started briefly before this Victorian teenager, where I'd go on a city break to Rome and see strange and orthodox things in the sky. There'd be certain snippets of things that I was sort of being built up. But the story of the teenager, the Victorian teenager, really was inherited from my wife's past, and where she lived as a child used to be Victorian farmland. And many mediums in the family and mediums that she'd seen throughout her life basically told her that there was this girl around her that actually looked strikingly like her, and this girl had been taken, and I quote, by the hands of another. Now that really can only mean one thing, but she sort of lived with it, and children who used to go and play at the house would go upstairs to play and come downstairs and say, can you go and tell that little girl I don't want to play anymore? But there was no one else up there. And obviously, it was sort of a spooky type of house, sort of kind of area.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, when I sort of got together, I sort of inherited. And we both went to see the same medium, who my wife had seen, many, many years earlier. And independently, she basically told us that there was this girl around. She actually named her and said that she wanted us to investigate and look into her death, because it had been covered up, and she was, a bit due to unfinished business, she was refusing to leave, the realm that she's now stuck in. So we agreed. We both police officers. We agreed. We didn't have a particular time or a date of the event. We didn't necessarily know what had happened, but we went to our sort of city central library, and because we had a name, we looked at every sort of death from the modern day, which was 2009, and we went all the way back to the Second World War, because again we didn't have any specific date, but we thought where my wife's house and estate was, that would have been built round about that time, so we'll go back that far. But we couldn't find anything, and we literally spent all day looking through the records based on the name that we had, and we couldn't find anything. So I think the next day we went and had a private lunch, which we thought was private, and there was literally just myself and my wife there, and we were just discussing, saying, look, what is this now serving? We've gone as far as we possibly can. We've done as much as we think we can. We don't have a date. What we're going to do? I think the best thing to do is to call it a day. From that point on, things took a really, really negative turn, and we got on from that Sunday lunch, and we walked into the house, and as we walked in, the radiators switched themselves off, and the house was freezing cold. It was that particular afternoon was extremely eerie. I'd had something attempting to possess me. We'd had, leading up to that, we had in our living room, we had a 6-foot double glazed window, and that had just shattered from the inside. It's almost like a poltergeist activity. It was sort of a real negative turn. So I sort of found the medium up and said, look, this is now, last time we saw you, you offered to help us. We declined at that time, but now we would like some help, because it's getting, uncomfortable. So she said, well, yeah, I'll if you, I've got no car, but if you can come and pick me up, bear in mind it's only like a 30-40 minute drive from where we lived. If you come and pick me up, I'll come and help you in the morning, which would have been the Monday morning. So I said to her, well, while I'm on the phone to you, actually the house has gone back to normal. It's gone okay again. And the medium says, yeah, that's because she's with me. And she's basically saying that you promised to help and you haven't. And it was basically that this girl was 14. She was from I didn't know that particular time still, but it was from Victorian England in the year 1850, and that is really why we hadn't actually found anything in the records, because we'd only gone back to the Second World War.
Oh, I see.
But she said, so yeah, because we didn't have any dead. So nevertheless, we carried on. We said, okay, well, we're going to get some help tomorrow. What can go wrong? It's literally now sort of mid-afternoon. We'll stop here. We'll get it sorted tomorrow. And we then later on in the evening, began to smell flowers in the house, and things started to happen that again made it uncomfortable for us to be there. And we had to leave our house, because it was very, very uncomfortable, and there was a strange sort of eerie, haunted, horrible feel. And we made the 30-minute drive to the mother-in-law's house, because she had some kind of understanding of this story, because she'd been, obviously in the same house as my wife, as her mother. So we went over there about 1:30 in the morning. We went to bed. It was a ground floor sort of garage conversion. We slept there. About 3:30 in the morning, which was then February the 9th in 2009. I remember being taken back to what I would describe, but I can remember vividly, as if I'm still there. It was an old wooden bedroom. I was seemingly lying on a bed or in one side of the room, and I could see in the right-hand corner of the room, the very right-hand corner, there was a wooden door. There was blue curtains, and at that point, I heard the door open because it creaked, the wood creaked. I saw the curtains move because of the draft, and then I heard the voice of a young girl say, "Here he is." At that point, the wife woke up and said I was absolutely screaming in hysterics,
Wow.
as if I was being attacked. But when I looked across at her, she was in the same vein. She was the one in hysterics, and basically we were slightly different times, but in the same incident, we were basically looking at each other in hysterics as if we were being attacked. Now, obviously, after this had happened, we both got up. We couldn't go back to sleep. We waited. Family got up, and when we told them, we then, probably about 10 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, we both went outside to go and collect the medium in the car. Literally, as I walked on the driveway to get in the car, there was a phone call from her saying, "Sorry, I can't help you." So I called her straight back and said, with all due respect, you are going to help us because something really bad happened last night. So we carried on. She agreed. We carried on. When we got to her house, she was nervously pacing around on her doorstep. The door behind her was closed. And it had transpired that on the morning, a washing machine had lifted up off the ground. It wasn't even switched on, and she put a coffee cup in the kitchen. And when she came to retrieve it minutes later, to be moved and put on the windowsill of her living room, something was trying to stop her from coming to help us.
Wow!
She came over to the house, and again, to cut a very, very extremely long story short, she repeated this girl's story to us in our living room, and what she said is this girl, she actually gave us the date of 1850. Now, the reason that we smelled flowers is because it was the 9th of February was the anniversary of the incident, but it was in 1850.
Right.
So it had actually been 59 years previous. And what she said was this girl had been abused by her stepfather. She also gave his name. And on this particular occasion, which was about 3:30 in the morning on the 9th of February, 159 years earlier, he'd come into the bedroom, as I'd seen, and he basically accidentally smothered her, and she died. What we also didn't realise until that particular point is that we also had the spirit of her assailant with us as well. And he was the one that had been smashing windows and doing all kinds of things in the house. So, again, to cut a long story short, she managed to get this girl to wherever she was meant to be. And in relation to him, he put up such a fight that she had to get help from the other side, and it actually made her ill for 6 months.
Right.
Because he was that powerful and he was that strong.
Yeah.
As the girl was leaving, she said to us, "Thank you, I'm sorry, and my favourite colours are pink and lilac," which was seemingly a strange thing to say. However, a couple of days later, we came back from a day out, and when we walked into our house, there was a pink and lilac flower waiting for us. So we had basically been taken back in time to either observe or experience or do something that the last moments of this girl's life.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And that really, so really for me, that is the one sort of pinnacle point that I would cite as being what you would class as some kind of awakening.
Yes,
because from that point on,
it seemed like that from the introduction I've seen from you. Well, when you say he accidentally asphyxiated her, what brings you to that conclusion? Do you not think he was the purpose? Yeah, on purpose, or?
Well, the information that was passed is that he used to abuse her.
Right.
And on this particular occasion,
he was just trying to keep her quiet, sort of thing.
He was trying to keep her quiet, and she, as a result of that, he's put his hand over her mouth and nose,
maybe for too long,
and she died. So, so the information that came to us was that it was more that scenario than a deliberate thing to do
Yeah,
it.
not like
It was
a murder,
basically-
more like a manslaughter
No,
type of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
it's very
Exactly.
sad though, isn't it? It's yeah,
It's extremely sad. But
yeah. Well,
say it had happened, and it became a part of our life as well.
oh, that's quite fascinating, that story. Yeah, I know it's. Is that actually featured in one of your books, or is it? Sort
Yeah,
of like
it's the ebook called "When Murder Travels Through Time."
Oh, right, yeah, I've
And
seen that. I haven't actually got that book. I've got a couple of your books, but I haven't actually got that one. But yeah, I'll have to get hold of that. That sounds interesting. Now, really, your research goes into like advanced science and sound geometrics and the knowledge which is encrypted within monuments, ancient monuments, etc., isn't it? Even religious buildings and scriptures, etc.
It certainly does. Again, 2009 being an extremely pinnacle year. I was kept seeing a golden key being given to me in my mind's eye, and I couldn't understand what a gold key was until I, some time later I looked into it and what it really means. And when you go to church, you can see sometimes on the stained glass window somebody being handed a golden key.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
really it's the Gnostic worthiness of sacred knowledge. So it's basically symbolic of coming into sacred knowledge. And that really was given to me in 2009. So from that point, alongside, with a happy marriage of lots of different paranormal things, seeing wormholes and UFOs coming out of them and dimensional gateways opening in front of me and things like that, the happy marriage of being given lots and lots of sacred information. I can actually be sitting at home even now and actually pinpoint the exact moment that information is being put into my head. Now, what that information is really is code-breaking information that has enabled me to create a blueprint that spans the whole of the ancient world. But the whole of the ancient world also spans into the world religions, because it's all the same message, it's all part of the same blueprint. And that blueprint is really something that goes deep and is not being taught in any public levels of any religion or any public levels of history. So it's enabled me to, again, with 17 years of evidence gathering, and that sort of put me in good stead to now code break all of these ancient codes. And what I found really, yes, sound is extremely important. When you look at the likes of Stonehenge, it is really a gigantic tuning fork. It's a phonetic profiler that is capable of deciphering hidden messages within sound waves. So in other words, Stonehenge is really a massive receptor, receiver, transmitter, where the wise ones, the in-tune ones, are able to receive languages from other places in the form of sound, and they're able to scribe and decipher a language. And when you start looking at mathematics and numbers, there is mathematical proof of a correlation between Stonehenge and planet Mars, and the moon, between the Great Pyramid and the planet Mars, the Sidonian city. So there's this grander thing that's going on. But the ancient code basically is that all of these monuments, these ancient monuments, are all connected as a computer, and they are harnessing the Earth's energy lines, and they are basically massive amplifications, but not only amplifications of sound, but they're all also amplifications of the inner vessel, the inner portal, which is the pineal gland. And when you look at the likes of the Great Pyramid, is what people don't realise is when you put an overlay of the human head over the Great Pyramid, it actually marks the exact location of the three master glands of the third eye system, which is your inner portal. So, for argument's sake, where you have the king's chamber, you have the pineal gland. Where you have the pituitary gland, you have the queen's chamber, and so on. And when you get the subterranean chambers, and even now, Egyptologists and scholars are scratching their head as to what the subterranean chambers of the Great Pyramid mean. What it means, it represents the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind feeds the conscious mind. It's really a giant replica of the human brain, the inner portal, as well as a gigantic resonance chamber to transcend to other places.
Wow.
So I found all this magnificent blueprint. When you start looking at the likes of the Heads of Easter Island, which again, they have mathematical code encrypted within them. They have spiritual code encrypted within them. They have They again, they are basically a crystalline aerial to other places. And when you look at the main pyramids in Tikal, Tikal comes from Tika, which means the third eye. When you look at the word Vatican, it comes from Vatika. Tika is the third eye. They're talking about this inner portal, which is the pineal gland. And that is why at the Vatican City, you'll see lots of statues of pine cones, because pine cone gives us the word pineal.
Yeah, you do see those a lot in a lot of buildings, don't you? Pine cones, yeah.
You do, but that really is symbolic of our inner portal, which is our pineal gland, and it goes a lot deeper than that. It goes more expansive than that. But in a nutshell, all of these ancient monuments, whether they're monoliths, whether they're pyramids, whether they're gigantic heads, whether they are the Nazca lines, whether they are white horses on hills as pictorials, whether they are the spirals of crop circles, they are all hidden messages. They are all sort of hidden frequencies that are able to be deciphered by the people who are tuned in.
Do you think there's some sort of secret, I don't know, it's not a secret society, but a secret collection of people who know all these secrets, and because I've heard that we've lost a lot of knowledge over the centuries, and it's been blocked off to us. I don't know if you have that opinion of that, or if you agree with that.
Absolutely. When you look at beautiful geometry on churches and Islamic buildings and all, geometry was put there because of its sonic resonance. The sonic resonance, especially when you start introducing sound, hymns, sung, it actually resonates to the point of sacredness. Now, what happens is with geometry is, if you imagine the principle of creation is geometry, and all geometric shapes are determined by a circle. Now, basically every known life form begins as a sphere, which is the circle. So if you imagine the universal consciousness is a dot, if you then imagine a circle around the dot, which then becomes the monad, is universal consciousness. If you imagine a dot that moves, then becomes a line, and a line is a radius, and a radius comes from radios, which means sun god. It is the Christ intellect. It is the connection of the Christ to the infinite. Then, when you start looking at this sacred geometry was once taught as part of initial early Christianity, but it was then blocked as heresy.
Yeah.
Because the priesthoods of the time actually wanted this sacred information to be retained by them, by the chosen ones, by the initiates. And this obviously goes back even further into the likes of the mystery schools of Egypt, where you have the priesthoods, the priestesses, you have the pharaohs. Pharaoh means great mind. You know, we have the likes of the gods Teote, which is really the master of thought. Teote is thought. They wanted to keep all of this sacred information to the secret brotherhoods. Now that information comes all the way through into the modern day, in the likes of the high degrees of Masonry, in the Kabbalah, in the Sufism of Islam, in the Mithraism of Christianity. When you start looking at company logos, when you start looking at vehicle badges and logos, they are all containing this sacred message within sacred geometry. And it goes all the way from the ancient past all the way through to the modern day, but it is a hidden secret because it is for the Hierophants, it is for the Hermetics. Now those words simply mean those who are able to understand the sacred mysteries, and metaphors and symbols began to be used as a way of communication between the initiates, in which they were able to decipher and interpret sacred information through geometry, through shapes, through metaphors, through symbols. And so, yes, it's a deliberate ploy to keep this sacred information away from the public. And they know full well that the further away from self that people go, the more their consciousness diminishes. The closer to self that they get, the more their consciousness rises. And that is why they created this false reality of false icons, in order to keep people outside of themselves, because that way their consciousness will always remain at a low ebb, at a low level, and they will never ever see or understand that there's this secret language going on. So, in a nutshell, yes, it is being deliberately kept from us.
Yeah. I mean, did you discover that when you were actually in the police force? Because as I understand it, the police force, even as the police force insignias, like with the star shapes, are something to do with the sun gods from ancient past. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly started to wake up and start seeing a wider reality before I left. When you start looking again, masonry, and it's not all bad, you know. It's basically, yes, a society with secrets. But when you start looking at the police insignia, you know, you have the seven-pointed star, which is the symbol of the Kabbalah. When you start looking at the crown, you know, you have the Binah understanding. Yeah. You have the crown of the superintendent. You have the double chevron of the sergeant. You know, you have the Masonic black and white, but again, you know, which is all to do with duality, which is all to do with the balancing of opposites. When you turn those black and white squares round, you then start getting a double square diagonal, which then starts becoming secret information of how to commune with the higher consciousness. So yes, I began to have a realization. But obviously that realization is more now than it was then. But there were snippets and fragments of this awakening before I left the service.
Yeah, because it leads you to the. I mean, if that is all true, it leads you to the fact that the police force are being controlled by a mysterious force outside of. Yeah, which is actually looking after the people that think themselves more important than what the normal people are. Is the way I think of it, like that.
Well, it is. Well, again, when you start looking at the insignia of the police force, which again is the Kabbalah, which is mystical Judaism, when you start looking at who, you know, creates laws, now laws is really that the god of law is Saturn, and that is why the police wear black, because the colour associated with Saturn is black. Now, when you start looking at the God of Law and the police and the Kabbalah, when you start looking at legalities, when people sign a contract, Saturn has magnetic energy which contracts. So we then start to see that the whole of this legal system, this whole banking system, this whole reality of what we live in is actually controlled by the same few people.
Yeah.
And when you start realising that, you do realise that, yes, everything in society, everything of significance and importance is controlled at a point of origin.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we hear about the top of the pyramid. Now, what that top of the pyramid is I've heard it be described as like reptilian aliens. I mean, what's your opinion of that? I couldn't believe it if you'd have asked me a few years ago about reptilians, I'd have said I was a lot of rubbish. But I've heard so much over the last few years about reptilians and from different people, from different walks of life. And to me, there's something in it, you know. Don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I've seen an ET, not a reptilian, but they do exist. There are many races of extraterrestrials that do have different appearances. Draconians, reptilians, whatever you want to call them, they do exist.
I think it's just our description of them, isn't it? Because they look reptilian. It's, you know.
Absolutely, and you know, of course, we have the R complex of the brain, which is the reptilian brain and things. But yes, there are several races that are closely interlinked with earthly society and always have been. Now, as I say, I've stood next to one. I've stood next to somebody who was 6'3", black eyes, energy filled, made me sort of spin. Skin completely taut over the contours of the bones of his face. He was not from here. Now there are many races that are walking amongst us, and of course, you know, why wouldn't there be? You know, the universe is full of life. It's not empty. It's not empty space. It's full. So yes, they do exist. But when I start looking at the things like the Sumerian scrolls and the Zechariah Sitchin translation of them, I see a completely different translation, which is one of a metaphor for geometric creation. And when you start looking at the names of the characters of these Sumerian scrolls, you then start to realise that is actually true. Their chief god is called Anu. Now, when you start looking into one of the oldest languages of Earth, which is Sanskrit, Anu means atom. When you start looking at the Shetty, the snake brothers, which is Enki and Enlil, that becomes the double helix of DNA. When you start looking at a lalu means wave genetics. So it's a waveform that creates DNA. So we have Adam and Tiamat, which is basically Adam and Eve in Eridu, which is Eden. Now Eden is the body, and of course they all lived in the east of Eden. Now the east of Eden is the right brain, which is the connector to the higher forces. So when you start analysing this secret indoctrination within these Sumerian scrolls, you start looking at the Watchers, and the Watcher means he who is awake. It's talking about consciousness. It's talking about the fertility event. This ambag that seems to be carried around on a lot of ancient depictions, including well, people don't know what that means, but what that is, it's a genetic message, because when you look at the handle of the handbag, the handle of the handbag is an arch which is 180 degrees. 180 degrees is the perfect bonding angle for hydrogen bonding, which then takes you back to the DNA double helix of Enki and Enlil. When you look at the actual square of the handbag, you see the Punnett square, which is really telling us that germates, which are germs, how they connect to germs of the opposite sex to create the fertility event, the fertilization event. Then you start looking at how they tell you that Enki is associated with semen and fertility, and you then look at where the Sumerian scrolls didn't actually say that Planet X was the home of the Anunnaki. It was actually Dooku. Dooku means the mound of Venus. It is the Mons Verinis, which is the pubic bone. So we're then going straight back to fertility. When you start looking at what Nibiru is given the name of Planet X, Nibiru, which means wandering planet, is what the Egyptians called Nebheru, which is the planet Venus. Again, it's associated with semen and fertility, because in Sanskrit, again, the word for Venus is Shukra, which means seminal secretion. It's really talking about genetics and the fertilization event of humanity. It's nothing to do with what Zachariah Sitchin has actually translated.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because you do see that, well, for want of a better word, handbag, in different, across the world, don't you, in different religions. It's, it's weird.
You do?
Yeah.
You do. You also see the Egyptians carrying what is known as the Ankh, which is that, obviously, the key of life is what it's known as, but the Ankh, not only is it an energy director, again, talking about, the phonetic profile of Stonehenge, but it's also what is basically DNA duplication. So when a protein sees the DNA cell, it will wrap itself over the top and then tie itself at the ends. It's really duplication of cells, and these energy directors are able to change the molecular level of DNA. So it's really telling us about the key of life, which is the duplication of cells. When you look into the Bible and you start looking at the book of Genesis, the book of Genesis is really the book of genetics, the book of genes. Right, yeah, because then you go into Adam and Eve, which is the atom and the electron, which is extracted from the atom as part of nuclear fission, which becomes the Eve, the atom and the Eve. When you look at Noah comes from two Hebrew words, nunchet, which means life in the waters. It's talking about the child in its mother, which is the arc, which is the arc length, which is the sphere, and that sphere, as I said earlier, is the origin of all known life forms. So the story of Noah is talking about the creation of a child, the fertility event. So is Jesus Christ. So is Mary Magdalene. So are all of these biblical characters. They are not what they are taught to be.
No. In fact, they go back much further than the Bible, don't they? Into the ancient Indian, the Mahabharata, and also the Quran, isn't it? It's these characters, I believe, have come from those originally, as I understand it.
Well, again, when you look at different civilizations, you can see that the story of Jesus has happened at least 15 times previous.
Yes, so that's kind of what I meant. Yeah, it's
yeah. So but Jesus, again, all of these biblical characters are really a fiction to conceal fact. They are metaphors for ourself. Now, when you look at the word deity, it comes from deit, which means self. What they're actually hiding from us is that our own sanctity, our own potential, our own. We are all Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is really talking about the solar force within us, the dragon rider, the master of the dragon, which is the master of wisdom, which is the Christ force within us, and that is activated by certain practices, by certain spiritual practices that activate this Christ seed, the energy of which is then stored in the solar plexus, which is known as Bethlehem. Inside the solar plexus, you have a thimble-sized depression known as the manger. So we have this Christ force that is birthed in a manger in Bethlehem. And according to the Gnostics and whatever, a virgin is basically someone who knows how to use sexual energy. And that then gets us into sexual sublimation. It then gets us into celibacy. It then gets us into resurrection, which means to use again. So you can see that this story of Jesus, who was then crucified on the cross, which is the optic chasers of moving inside the brain, you can see that all of this then starts to develop into a metaphor for our own inner sanctity and our own inner portal, our own inner potential.
Do you receive much criticism for that point of view? Because I mean, I know it's actually quite out there. It's not all your research, is it? Because I've heard it from different points of view too, but which agree with your research too. Do you get much abuse because of that? Because I know that when you get someone who's very religious, they don't seem to be able to see past what they're reading in the Bible, and what are your views on that, Mike? It's
Well, I do. I mean, when I talk about this, and again, people can only see things from their level of perception. Now, when people are brought up into a certain religion and their mind is completely rented out, and they actually can't see, they don't look for the truth because they're told they've found it, because they're, but when you actually start looking at the likes of Catholic popes like Pope Leo X that have publicly said in the past, it has served as well, this myth of Christ. When in 2017 you have the current Pope Francis, at a Catholic Mass saying that Jesus is metaphorical, not literal. Now, the people at the top of these religions know full well the truth of these characters, but unfortunately humanity is such that it has to have some kind of icon to follow. It has to be, I don't like using the word sheep, but they are sheep that must follow a shepherd.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, they describe the sheep in the Bible anyway, aren't they? So
exactly. Well, they are the flock who follows the shepherd. But what they don't tell you is the good shepherd is really the enlightened being who understands this true nature. Now, when you actually criticise that shepherd to the flock, of course there's going to be a bad reaction. When I go into the UFO community and start saying to you what Zachariah Sitchin has said about the Anunnaki is not entirely as it is, it gets the same reaction, because I've got the benefit of seeing the whole of the ancient world. Now, when you find a blueprint, it's the same as in the universe. When you understand that within the universe everything, without exception, follows a mathematical sequence. It follows a mathematical code that has been pre-programmed. So therefore, the Earth is not flat, because the whole principle of creation is one of spherical geometry. So therefore, one planet out of a billion being flat is not possible, because it goes against the blueprint and common sense. Now, when you look at a blueprint, when you look at the evidence of that blueprint, when you go to a crime scene, it speaks to you. It doesn't matter what people on the side of the road are telling you happened. If the evidence tells you something else, then those people at the side of the road are not telling you the truth. And that is what I'm finding. And this blueprint it's not just one small aspect. It's not just one monolith in the middle of Wiltshire. It is the whole of the ancient world that are telling you the same thing. Now, when the same words keep popping up, when the same numbers keep popping up repeatedly, time after time after time, that is something to be paid attention to, because there is evidence there, there's a message in there, and they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They're all telling us that they're all singing from the same database of knowledge, because they're all leaving the same message, they're all leaving the same codes, and they're all leaving the same information about self and the universe and how we play a part in that, in their structures, in their monuments, in biblical structure, in Islamic structure, in the Torah, in Hinduism, in Sikhism, in Islam. All of these, when you start looking beyond the public levels of these belief systems, you then begin to see the truth. And the truth is, not is what's being taught on your Sunday service. That is a fiction that is concealing fact.
Yeah, they'll kind of, I agree with you completely, actually. When you go to, it's like fairy stories, isn't it? You're really just, I really don't want to insult anybody, because I'm sure you must get quite a lot of feedback against your theories with some people. But I mean,
of course. I mean, I was at an event the other week, and somebody came over and started talking about what I write about and what I say, and they were a Christian, and I started to speak to them, and they said, "Okay, so everybody's been brought up on a lie except for you." And I said, "No, I was brought up on the same lie, but I've seen through it." And I said, "I'm not the only one that's seen through it. There's lots of people seeing through it, and when you do see through it, it then starts to make sense."
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You have to, because it's not all entirely. That's what I was saying. It's not all entirely your theory. I've actually heard it. I mean, obviously, we all learn from each other, don't we? And you've obviously learned from other people with that theory and built upon it. I mean, when we look at things like in a new country like the US, when in Washington they've got the great big, what do you call it? The big pointed monument. Yeah. Well, like our Cleopatra's Needle, it's exactly as I believe there's some sort of resonance with what you're talking about with that, isn't there?
Well, there is for one, it's a tuning fork, and for two, in Egyptian mythology, it's the penis of Osiris. Now, Osiris is basically the pineal gland, but Osiris is connected with the constellation of Orion. You then have the dome of Washington, D.C., which is connected with Isis, which is the womb. You then have the oval office. The oval is connected to the womb and also the pituitary gland in the brain. You have the symbol for Sirius, which is the dome, the star, and the obelisk. You have so much worship of Isis, the goddess Isis, within American culture, within Washington, D.C., within London, within Parliament. It's basically, it all comes from ancient Egypt. When we look at the likes of the red carpet at Oscar ceremonies, that is really symbolic of a royal bloodline that goes back to the pharaohs of Egypt. So you will find that the majority of the US presidents, British royalty, European royalty, are connected to the pharaohs of Egypt. Even David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, is related to the Queen. He's the cousin of Boris Johnson. He's the cousin of Harriet Harman, who was temporary leader of the opposition. You will start to see genetically that the people who are put in power, who are ruling over us, are really part of the same genetic line. And you see all this symbolisation in, as I say, in Washington, in Paris, the Statue of Liberty. You've got all of London. You've got the River Thames, which is Tamus, the dark river, which is Apophis, who's the serpent of darkness, which then leads you to dark evil, which then leads you to the devil, which is ignorance. You have all of these things going back to the same place in ancient history. So, the president, the Congress, even the signing of the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July that was signed in Philadelphia. Philae is the temple of Isis in Egypt. Delpha is Delphos, the womb, is the goddess of the womb, the goddess of motherhood. It all goes back to Egypt. So, again, it's all part of the blueprint that has been found, that you see these ancient belief systems, these ancient sacred information that was for the privileged few, still today are hidden within monuments, within buildings, within even the governments of the land. When you look at the word America, it comes from Amaraku, which basically means the land of the feathered serpents. That then takes you to Quetzalcoatl, which is really talking about Kundalini energy, which is the serpent fire at the base of the spine that is activated by certain practices. It all leads to the same point of origin. If you imagine a tree, the bark of the tree is true Gnosticism. It is the truth. It is the origin of everything. But the branches have been deliberately put there as a means of keeping people away from that bark. That is really what is happening in people's reality field. And many of them cannot see past the individual twig or the individual branch or the individual leaf that their reality rests upon.
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating. I hope everyone's taking note out there, because I'm going to be asking questions afterwards. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, Michael. I don't really know where to go next with it. What about Atlantis? Do you think there's any sort of connections with the old legends of Atlantis with the ancients, or do you think that was kind of a story that was, manufactured by somebody?
Again, Atlantis and Lemuria are part of the blueprint that are found as part of history. Now, when I again, just a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to a friend and his wife, and they were talking. They're very spiritual, and they were talking about the reactivation of the Atlantean and Lemurian crystals. So, what's the real meaning of that? When you look at the likes of Plato, who and many of these Greek philosophers like Socrates and all that actually had their education in the mystery schools of Egypt. They then took that to Greece. You see that the Kabbalah had their education in the mystery schools of Egypt and took it into Judaism. So what does it mean? When you look at Plato, he said that Atlantis is the island that rules 7. So when we look at the human spine, which is the biblical Jacob's ladder that takes you from earth to heaven. Now, the lower chakras of the body are known as the kingdom of earth. The upper chakras are known as the kingdom of heaven. So when you climb up Jacob's ladder, you come to heaven. The human spine has 33 vertebrae. When you get to the 33rd vertebrae, it is known medically as Atlas. Now, Atlantis means the island of Atlas. What it's really telling you, when you see the legend of Atlas holding up the world, it is really holding up the mind. It is holding up the consciousness which exists within Golgotha, the place of skulls. Now, the pineal gland is the master gland of the chakra system. It is that inner portal that I spoke about in the ancient cultures. So that master gland is situated in the geometric centre of the human brain. It is between the 2 hemispheres, and it is surrounded by the cerebrospinal fluid. Therefore, that master gland is an island. It is the island that rules 7. It is the master gland that rules over the 7 chakras. So Atlantis is talking about consciousness. It is, and the re-emergence, the reactivation of Atlantean and Lemurian crystal is the area of the brain between the pituitary gland and the pineal gland is known as the Crystal Palace. You may recognise that from a certain football team name, but it is known as the Crystal Palace. That is the reactivation of the Atlantean and the Lemurian crystals. So we have Atlantis, which is the pineal gland, which is Osiris, the king's chamber in Egypt, and we have Lemuria, which is Queen Mu, who is basically a Mayan queen, who is the equivalent of the Egyptian goddess Isis. Isis is the pituitary gland. So there we have Atlantis, the pineal gland, Lemuria, pituitary gland. It is the masculine and the feminine counterparts. Now, the only way that we can reach what the Egyptians called their god state, their godhead, is by the balance and the union of polarities, the union and the balance of opposites, which is masculine and feminine, as aspects of duality. When you see the likes of Egyptian mummies, who incidentally face the east, because the east in cardinal points is the direction of enlightenment, illumination, you will see that their arms are crossed over their chest in a cross formation. That cross formation is symbolic of the union of opposites, and that cross happens at a central point at the top of the heart. It's really the union of opposites. When you see the mask of King Tutankhamun, the gold is really the philosopher's stone. It is the internal alchemy. Now, alchemy comes from chem, which is the former name of Egypt, where we get chemistry, alchemy, chemicals, chemistry. It comes from Chem, Egypt. Now, when you look at the King Tutankhamun's mask, and you see the two serpents over the third eye, that is the sacred rivers of the Ida and the Pingala nerves. And when they meet the third eye, the sixth chakra, they create, certainly when they're balanced, it's the negative and the positive serpent. When they are balanced, they create what is known as a consciousness fusion, and that is really what it's indicating. When you start looking at what looks like a cobra headdress, is really the cerebellum, which is the little brain, which deals with equilibrium, which deals with balance. When you start looking at what people believe is a beard on these statues, it's not. It's what is known as the vermis, which means serpent, because the serpent, the vermis, separates the two lateral hemispheres, the two wings of the cerebellum. It's all to do with equilibrium, all to do with balance, the balancing of opposites which took them to their God state. It is the balancing of their vessel. So Atlantis and Lemuria are really a metaphor for our own inner consciousness.
Oh, yeah. That is fascinating. That's I mean, I'm a great fan of Ancient Aliens. I don't know if you are, but in your opinion, do you think aliens built the pyramids, or do you think, or they gave the technology to the ancients in order to build the pyramids? I still can't think that it was just done by human hands myself, but.
Now, my theory is they were used by humans, but they were taught by people not of this world. When you look at Egyptian documents, they tell you that they were visited by people from the stars, and how they were given certain mathematical equations and certain information. So, but there is no record of the Egyptians ever building the pyramids. Now, when you start looking at all of these fantastic sites, I believe they were put there by people who are of a greater, or certainly of a greater knowledge base than people are. But I do think there were certain individuals within the higher society that were taught how to use these pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
And when you start looking at, the famous face on Mars, which in the Zachariah Sitchin story is the face of Alalu. It isn't, because as I said, Alalu is wave genetics. But when you do actually look at how the Sidonian city on Mars has actually been geographically mapped by Richard G. Hoagland, and you can see that there's the likes of five-sided pyramids. Now, the number 5 is all to do with realised man, total knowing, again, consciousness, the pentagram, the fifth element. But when you start looking at the face on Mars, and you start looking at the longitude and latitude grid vectors, it has encrypted a satellite navigation location of Stonehenge. When you look at Stonehenge and you look at the diameters and the mathematics within the diameters of Stonehenge, it tells you how to find the Sidonian city on planet Mars. When you look at the Great Pyramid of Egypt and you start doubling pi, which again is a mathematical frequency, but a double pi by the diameters of the pyramid, again, it is encrypted the location of the Sidonian city on Mars. When you look at Phobos, which is the moon of Mars, it has obelisks. When you look at the moon, it has a lunar abaca, which are a set of 6 obelisks that are mapped out to the diameters of the 3 main pyramids of Giza. That is clearly, when you start looking at Avebury in Wiltshire, it is an exact map overlay of the Sidonian city on Mars. When you look at Silbury Hill, which is the largest mound in Europe, it is an exact match of a mound that is on the Sidonian city on Mars. We have a Mars henge on Mars. We have all of these correlations between the planets, where the likes of the Great Pyramids, the likes of Stonehenge, the likes of other pyramids were creating a portal in order to transmit. So for anyone who's seen Star Trek, and beam me up, Scotty, this was really happening, and it was really happening with other planets. And there's mathematical proof, and there's monuments up there that are proofs. It's either a civilization that has come from these planets, or it's a civilization that is able to travel between them. Now that to me would suggest the ancient alien theory, Now, having seen an absolute plethora of UFOs of all shapes and sizes, both day and night, of all kinds of distance and all kinds of heights, some of them literally 500 feet above me, having seen them coming out of dimensional portals, having been telepathically invited to certain locations, there is something clearly going on that we are not being told about. And why would humans be the only life form or the only existence in a universe that is absolutely teemed with life?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah.
You know, it makes no sense.
No. Especially when you talk about the interdimensional aspects of it. I mean, this is why I called this show Paranormal Dimensions, because there are so many dimensions to life, I believe myself, but it's not just all extraterrestrial stuff. I think probably most of what we see is interdimensional, or see or experience.
Well, the extraterrestrial subject is just one of many. I mean, obviously, you know, it comes and goes, and it's in the news, and lots of people are seeing more and more things now. So there's obviously been some kind of enhancement of you know, a visual sort of display, but it's just one part of many things. If you imagine a massive stately home, you know, it doesn't just have one room; it has hundreds of rooms, and you know, whether you look at electromagnetic forces that some people call angels, whether you look at extraterrestrials, which are basically humanoids that are aligned to a different star system. We are aligned to this solar system, this star system, and some of them are aligned to Sirius, some of them are aligned to Orion, some of them are aligned to Arcturus, Alpha Centauri. You know, when you start looking at how a lot of these ancient monuments are in alignment with the constellation of Orion and the three belts, the three stars of the belt of Orion, you will see that the Orion nursery, the M42, is really the birthplace of matter for this side of the universe, for Earth. So they're basically telling us of our origins, which is really in Orion, is really in the stars. And when a star goes supernova, it creates gold. You know, when a star explodes and dies, it creates carbon, it creates oxygen, which then creates life. So really, you know, we are all particles of dead, exploded stars. Now, when we have a child, we call it a youngster, which is really saying a young star, because we are all the material of the stars. So in effect, we are all star people. Now, if a dead star is continuing to live within us, when our physicality dies, we will continue to live in something else, and that is how we become eternal in terms of these particles of matter.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that. The youngster, yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? Right, I think I'll tell you what, Michael. I mean, if you're up for it, I'd really like to continue with this. Maybe do a part 2. Would you be up for that?
I certainly would. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed it.
I think we've got so much that, well, you've got so much that we probably haven't had time to cover here, because I think we're just about coming up to the end of this show anyway. But I think I'd like to do a part 2 with you if you're up for it, and then that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, for the next show I'll do that then. This is going to be the first 2-parter. But anyway, thanks ever so much. I'm
privileged.
Yeah, no, thanks ever so much, Michael. And as I say, we'll continue this, and there'll be a part 2 coming up, people out there. And I hope you've been as intrigued as I have been. And I want to say thank you again for Michael, and you'll be hearing again next week from him. So I'm going to say bye everyone now, and hope you'll tune in again for part 2. Thank you. Bye.